Difficult conversations will happen all the time, but understanding how to make them most productive is a valuable skill, and unfortunately, we aren't taught to do them well. And if you blow a high stakes conversation, you can irreparably damage a relationship with your significant other, friend, or even a family member. So here are 5 ways to prevent World War III to stay focused on what you need to talk about and not get hijacked by your emotions. If you appreciate and found the video helpful, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. It would be an honor to have someone like you to be part of the community. The first tip that comes to mind, probably the most important, especially in a difficult conversation, is to not enter that conversation with whatever emotion you are feeling. A conversation always involves multiple people. It's never about one person. And I'm not telling you something you don't know. This is just to remind you what your heart knows. A conversation is a back and forth game, right? And I bet most of your major regrets that you've had in your past or major conflicts that you had in your past was because you were too caught up with your emotions when you had it. Something came up and you said something you wish you've never said. You felt so terrible about it, and it made the conflict or the conversation 10 times harder. We've all experienced that pattern before. I'm sure we all know where that one error can lead to in a conversation. So try not to be too deep into your emotion. Understand a chaotic conversation won't solve anything. If someone's barking at you, don't try to bark louder. That doesn't signal who the more dominant person is. In fact, the more stoic you are, the more calm you are, the more control you actually have to steer the conversation, because when somebody's emotion is all over the place and you're calm and centered, you're breaking the pattern of the other person's state, which is, all over the place, aggressive, combative, emotional, and you're psychologically, without them even knowing, penetrating their mind by breaking that pattern they have, forcing them to be on your level. A bonus technique when it's something through an unhappy message or text, I think a lot of people know but don't usually act upon, is if you're angry about something or if you're unhappy and you want to respond, just don't respond for 24 hours, right? What does that do? You calm down, the emotions subside, the hormones go down, and you're in a better mental state 24 hours later to respond. So I think a lot of people already know this. But we just don't act on it when the situation happens. But I think that's something to remember. Also, if you're into biohacking, what you can do is, when you're in a heated argument and your heart starts to rise, maybe you're feeling a little bit flighty, agitated, angst, etc. When you're breathing, exhale longer than you're inhaling. Breathing out longer than you're breathing in has some really nice detoxifying effects. It also physiologically, whether you like it or not, puts you from the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, to the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. And that is physiological. That's why meditation works to calm you down. So number 2, I know number 1 was quite the long one. I went a little over the script here. I just have a few bullet points. I genuinely hope you're getting some value off of this. But number 2, acknowledge responsibility. Humility and accountability is big. Acknowledge your responsibility in the conversation you have to talk about. Whether it's the fact that you avoided the mess that you're supposed to handle, or whether it's something you've done that's contributed to the mess that's created. Acknowledge it right up front. And what's humility? Humility says, I don't know everything in the world. And then just have that accountability to admit your mistakes, so that you can right your wrongs. One of the reasons why it's so important is because by accepting responsibility, you're diffusing the other person's emotion. You're also honoring them a little bit, and it sets a much more level playing field for when you get into the difficult things that you need to talk about. And by doing so, you're gonna find the conversation a lot more easier than you thought it would be, because most of the time we oversimplify things. And it's going to be easier because assuming that you're willing to listen, the other person will be a little at ease and listen as well. Number 3, have a desired outcome. Never go into a difficult conversation without an end goal. The reason why a desired outcome is so important is because you never know what's going to happen. The person you're talking to might break down. You yourself might get emotional, whether it's anger or highly stressed out. So, I highly recommend this simple but effective breathing exercise that I mentioned to always keep your cool. And the thing that's going to stabilize your thoughts is the outcome you're causing, right? The reason why you're having this difficult conversation in the first place is because you're committed to making the relationship better. You're having the conversation because something isn't working, and so things need to change. You're having this conversation because you're committed for something to change because you know it's right, even though it's very hard to give that feedback. But you're giving it to them because you're committed to do the right thing, okay? So that goal, whenever things are going out of order, maybe things get too emotional, just go back to that desired outcome. The fourth thing you're going to do a lot in this conversation is you're going to listen and you're going to validate. I also want to introduce you to something called tactical empathy. Hostage negotiators, people that work with the police team, and psychiatrists use this, all right? People that have super high stake negotiations and conversations around the world use this technique. The key to getting what you want out of a situation and avoiding compromises and making the other side feel like they're treated fairly is tactical empathy. Tactical empathy is the act of sincerely empathizing with your counterpart's situation and then getting them to empathize with your situation. So let's just take a step back and let me paint a picture in your head. Imagine a psychotherapy session. During a psychotherapy session, a psychiatrist will encourage a patient to talk while she listens intensely. Occasionally, the psychiatrist will jump in to help clarify what the patient is saying and feeling. Psychiatrists do this because they know their patient will be less defensive and less opposed to change if they feel heard. The same principle applies to any difficult conversation. Your counterpart will feel uncomfortable dealing with you and will resist your ideas until you demonstrate that you understand their world and can empathize with their cares and concerns. Make them feel heard. So eventually you're going to say what you need to say, and the other person is going to react. And instead of arguing and debating, I want you to listen and I want you to validate what the person is saying. Sounds counterintuitive, but honestly, one of the most powerful things you can do in any conversation when there's a little bit of tension is to hear where the other person is at. The moment you say, "You're right," instead of "I know," or "Oh, I totally get why that's the case. If I felt the way you felt, I'd probably do the same thing." You see, the second you validate somebody, they immediately lower their guard down and stop defending themselves. It's actually unbelievable. Empathize, listen, validate. It can be the most powerful thing. And then once, of course, they feel validated, now that you've heard them, now they can listen. And that's when you come back to the final thing, which is you're going to restate the final outcome and keep coming back to it. And yeah, all that laid out there, all that we've discussed, you're gonna be really amazed. Understand that all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. We seek release from interpersonal relationships. We seek to be free from interpersonal relationships. These 5 things, plus some additional ideas and tips that I gave you, from being the more calm one, to not answering a text message 24 hours later, to let the emotions cool down, to the breathing exercise that I mentioned to get you to calm down, breathing out longer than you're breathing in, ideally a 4-second inhale followed by a 6-second exhale, and empathy. Just listen, and you'll be heard. Peace and love.